Remnant 2 is a fast-paced shooter based around souls and guns. Grab your cool gear, upgrade it, and take down big bosses. But what happens if you try to beat the game without any weapons whatsoever? This prevents you from both shooting and using your really useful attack mods. Oh, and you can't use the Engineer class either, as its skills are all 3 guns. This leaves us with only one option left: the Relic. Relics in Remnant 2 are used for healing primarily. How on earth are we going to beat the game with just 10 of these insignificant items? Meet the Tormented Heart. This guy will explode upon use and deal good damage while also healing you. Problem is, you only get 10 of them, which only lasts about 30 seconds. This is where the Invader class comes in. Using its last skill called Reboot, we can use all of our relics and then press Reboot to get them all back. Throw on Medic for more damage and easy heals, and you have a solid build that does a whopping 600 damage per hit. Not really great at all, especially in Apocalypse. I paired this up with the max skill cooldown being negative 80% to allow for a possible relic-only run. Additionally, bosses can get affixes randomly rolled on them. These range from dealing more damage to having more health or regeneration. Any one of these can be really painful to deal with, but they won't break us. All except for Empathy, which makes any relic you take heal the boss as well. If any of the bosses get this, there is no way to beat them. We need to get really lucky and pray the game doesn't throw it at us for every single boss. Now that the premise of the run is laid out, let's see if you can beat Remnant 2 Apocalypse mode while using only relics. Starting out, I select my pre-made character I've been collecting gear with since the game came out. This run is impossible on a new character as you can't really get this relic item without some significant work. Next, we roll our campaign and get Yesha as the first world. This is usually where I like to start, as it's much easier compared to the other worlds, and has bosses I feel very comfortable with. Before each boss in this game, there are areas you need to run through and then dungeons that you need to complete. I'm going to completely skip all these for the video as they're a joke with this build. The Tormented Relic does so much stagger and heals you through damage. So smaller enemies just die in 2 uses and you walk right through them. It was the exact same on every single planet, and yeah, for some reason, it's easier to not use weapons in these situations, as this thing is crazy good. Problem is bosses. It has very, very low damage, so fights can take about a half an hour sometimes. Kaeula's Shadow is our first major victim, and she rolled with Vicious and Drain. Now, Vicious grants a 15% damage bonus to her, and Drain means she life-steals health back whenever I take damage. With a total of 675 damage per hit and maybe 1,000 on a lucky crit, this was looking to be a slog already. Luckily, I have a few things going for me. I have infinite relics as long as I use the reboot skill before the timer runs out. I lose them all if I screw up, so I do need to pay close attention, but overall, it's a plus for me. Then I have a decoy. You see, the invader allows me to spawn a red decoy of myself anytime I use a relic and roll, thus taking any of the attention off of me, and yeah, it even works on bosses. Since we're using this on repeat, you can keep the boss at bay constantly. Kaeula herself does have a few troublesome attacks, but because of my tanky armor, I can heal through most of them. What I don't want to do is get stuck in the water. Wade out too far and your dodge is reduced to a slow thrust forward, which isn't ideal. But with me spawning health pools every 10 seconds and attacking at range, the fight goes pretty well. Eventually, Kaeula will go away and summon a bunch of tentacles. This phase had me worried at first, as it can be hard to know which is actually attacking you. But because they don't do a ton of damage and my AoE has really good range, I can attack them all at once and heal through every hit. And that's about it. Kaeula has a pretty basic attack pattern that really isn't hard to dodge. After a little over 6 minutes, I finally took her down in one single try. Pretty solid so far, but man, the length of that fight does have me worried. On to our second boss, and we already have a huge problem. Mother Mind rolled with Vicious and Empathy. Like I mentioned earlier, this will grant the boss a huge portion of health back when I use the relic. And all I have to deal damage is the relic, so this is not possible whatsoever. Especially since she's a required boss to move on. Because I still wanted to try this run, I made a new rule. Any of the bosses that happen to roll with Empathy, I will defeat with the Engineer Gauze Cannon and move on. This is a skill rather than a weapon, but still kind of cheating, as that thing is completely overpowered and makes for easy boss kills. So anything I have to quote-unquote cheat to beat, I'll go back on an adventure and defeat there. Adventures let you roll one planet separately from the campaign, and we could get different affixes there as well. Now, it took me a while to roll Mother Mind again, but she eventually spawned and I got Elemental Resist and Drain. Elemental Resist means the boss takes reduced damage from elements, and Drain is lifesteal. Elemental Resist isn't that big a deal here as we are using explosions, but our amulet does inflict burning each time we blow it up. We can get through without much hassle, but it is a noticeable affix we do not want. As for Mothermind, she's a floating root head, attacks with a lot of red pustules that explode on the ground and deal damage over time if you're on them. She can also spawn in little dudes to shoot you and then melee you with large prawns or a spin to win attack. The arena is a circle where you need to move from platform to platform, and if she breaks the platform you're on, it's immediate death. Just pay attention and you're golden. Plus, I can heal through almost any attack as long as I quickly get the relic off, making for a pretty fun encounter overall. After about 8.5 minutes, the Mothermind fell to her doom. With 2 bosses down, we can finally take on the Ravager, which you can technically skip by joining his side, but hey, that's too easy. He rolled with Hardy and Spiteful. Hardy grants him 15% more health, and Spiteful grants him 0 to 25% more damage, depending on how low his health is. These can be pretty challenging, especially since world bosses, or the last boss you need to move on in that world, tend to have a little bit more health. So he can insta-kill me and will take a while to defeat. Unfortunately, he also has a spin to win attack that I cannot survive through. It's a vortex that sucks me near him and continuously does damage. Lots of it, I might add. Overall, his melee attacks are easy to dodge, and the decoy protects me most of the time. But lose all the pillars in the fight and you have nothing to hide behind. As you can probably tell, having Hardy means our low damage is really low, and it takes some time to get anywhere here. Finally, down to his last phase, we run into a new problem. His final phase consists of this large AoE howl. He'll rush you and do it over and over again. This does an insane amount of damage and will delete you pretty much anywhere in the large radius. Thankfully, we aren't using stamina to attack really, so we can run out of it, but also our Relic's explosion has a certain range, meaning I need to rush the boss directly after that attack for maybe like 2 Relic charges and then run out again, extending the fight even further. Not an easy battle, and there were several close calls, but finally, after a grueling 15 minutes, I finally beat him. This one took 2 tries, but that 15 minutes is only counting the final attempt. Jeez, that final boss is gonna suck. Now, the Labyrinth is the next in-between worlds location where you need to solve some puzzles to get to the next few worlds. Defeating the rock creatures here was pretty easy as they're weak to explosions and get staggered to death. Problem is, we have the Labyrinth Sentinel or Cube boss, and our Relic can't do anything here. In fact, I think the developers knew this fight was a joke if you had access to large AoE attacks, and made it impossible to break the cubes without any physical damage from like a thrown melee or gun. Meaning it's officially impossible to beat Remnant 2 with only a Relic. I know, unfortunate, but how many of the bosses can we beat anyway? Since the video's not over, it's safe to assume I continued on. But before we do, I still need to break all these cubes to move forward. The goal is to break these glowing cubes on the giant cubes. Once all the small cubes are destroyed, the boss is dead. Mess up, get crushed, and you completely restart. Now, as per my rule, I did try to use the gauze cannon, and the results were terrible. It fires so slowly that hitting each cube and then getting out of the way is really tough. I gave it a good 6 tries, but the fire speed really hampered my ability to get anything done. Still not wanting to use weapons, I decided to switch over to the Vulcan or turret skill. This actually worked, because I can overclock the gun for infinite ammo and hold down the trigger for infinite fire. Each cube was much easier to hit. This still wasn't easy, as I need to stop firing to avoid the giant smash, but with enough patience, I was able to move on. With the orb granted by a floating eyeball in hand, I enter the next world, which turns out to be Lawsome, specifically Morrow Parish, which means the Nightweaver is in our future, which I feel pretty okay with actually, but before that, we have a few bosses in the way. Through the sewers we go to meet up with the Bloat King. He rolled with Hardy and Elemental Resist, which we've already seen. This means we can do it, but it might take a while. The Bloat King's sort of a gimmick fight, actually. You need to deal damage to him, but he slowly moves around on the ceiling. He's going to switch between the orb phase and a laser phase. In the orb phase, you're meant to shoot this blue orb that floats around pelting you with beads of electricity. Break it, and I guess you do more damage to it, I don't even know. During the laser phase, you need to dodge lasers and attack the squid blob itself. More than anything, you're fighting the arena, as there isn't much room to move around, and you need to jump around platforms to move to the other side. Fall down, and you need to deal with a bunch of tiny blobs that quickly end you with electricity. Fortunately, this build is the ultimate move for this fight. Not a single attack can actually kill you, and you deal damage from almost anywhere in the arena. So while normally this would sound challenging, it's pretty much just turned into stand and click. It does take forever, but you're really not in any danger. Avoid the large lightning ball that gets thrown at you every so often, and you're golden. With 7 total minutes of wailing around eating a gross looking heart over and over, the king gets overthrown. Next up, we have the Huntress. Now, this is a lady on a beast that jumps around the rooftops and attacks you throughout the area. Once you reach this spot here, she's supposed to lay on the ground so you can have like a full boss fight without her running away. Unfortunately, this isn't currently working. Sometimes she just won't come down from the rooftops, and since we have such low damage, there's no way to defeat her before she runs off. And once she runs off, we can't shoot her to get her back down. So no Huntress for this run, which is fine anyway, as she's an optional boss. The real challenge came next with Magister Dullain, a seemingly harmless boss that turned out to be a nightmare for me. The grotesque monster rolled with Skullcracker and Spiteful. Skullcracker grants him +1 stagger, and Spiteful is the one that grants that 0 to 25% more damage. Overall, the guy's not really a big deal, as you can distract him with the decoys, while the AoE takes him out and the adds at the same time. Move in a circle around him to avoid any attack, and try not to get poisoned. Easy to mess up and get hit, but with a bit of running, you can get away with it. That is until the very end of the fight. He starts whipping around his tongue and trying to grab you. If it manages to catch you even a little bit, it's an instant death. This attack is pretty painful to be hit by, but what makes it even worse is each attempt to get to that very point in the fight is around 4 minutes. And when he grabs you 8 times in a row, those 4 minutes start to add up. In the end, I think I died around 12 times. Sometimes the tongue attack, and every once in a while a stray poison orb would hit me. He takes decent damage even with just the relic, but it's brutal to get insta-grabbed over and over. The final fight took about 6 minutes in total, which isn't that bad compared to some others already, but still the hardest boss to take down so far, and by a lot. Finally, we meet the Nightweaver, the feared dream thief who attacks relentlessly and grabs you through walls. She spawns with Regenerator and Elemental Resist. Regenerator is new and actually grants a very powerful health regen to the boss. So on top of my low damage, I now need to out-damage a good chunk of health regen every single second. The Nightweaver also has 2 phases, and in the first phase, she pelts you with projectiles and rushes you every once in a while. Dodge a little early and it's not too stressful. Halfway through, she summons bugs, which we have large AoE explosions, so that's not really hard to deal with. With constant enough damage, this part was not bad at all. I'd like to mention that this is about the time where I started to lean into the shield heal instead of the circle on the ground. You see, we have a lot of skill cooldown, letting me use reboot every 11 seconds and actually deal damage consistently. But that cooldown also affects the medic skill. I chose the healing pool as it only has a 10-second cooldown here. Problem is, the heal's really not active long and I need to stand still to use it. But with the shield heal, I instantly gain full shield for 10 seconds, a little bit of healing, and can run around. Shield is a little bit more powerful than it looks, as you can take almost any hit in the game and survive as long as it's active. Since the skill does have a larger cooldown, the pool seemed a bit better, except the shield heal will cool down while it's active. So you get shield for 10 seconds, and can then use it again 10 seconds after it runs out. I use this for some really good protection that could also heal me. This saved me many times throughout the run, and is sort of why Medic's the most used class by a pretty significant margin. As for the second phase of this fight, it's actually really easy. So the boss is going to phase into the wall and disappear pretty much throughout the fight over and over, tricking you and trying to grab you from behind. Turns out the relic explosion actually hits her through the wall, so you can damage her the entire fight. Then when she latches onto the ceiling to spawn in bugs, you defeat them while still hitting her from almost anywhere in the building. Avoid the grab attacks by using a decoy or simply dodging at the right time, and you get one of the easiest ways to defeat the Nightweaver, surprisingly so. Especially since you heal anytime you blow up the relic, thus tanking most of her attacks if you happen to get hit. Took around 10 minutes of dodging and weaving, but taking down the Nightweaver on the first try is a huge win in my book. Back in the Labyrinth, we open our next door to Nerud, hoping we do not get Shahala as our boss. He would be possible, but the fight wouldn't be pretty. Fortunately for me, we got Tal'Ratha, which you can tell by spawning in a cave rather than in a building. This is by far my favorite planet with my favorite bosses, plus some of the best lore and gears here, and well, thank you for a great experience overall. Right now, we can ignore that, however, as again, this relic makes any dungeon fight a joke. You walk around staggering every enemy 10 times in a row while depleting their health. It's absolutely nuts and great for 15 flying robots at one time. As for the first boss, we get Abomination. He's a brain filled with hard metal that tries to spit stuff at you or rush you. He rolled with Skullcracker and Hardy. More stagger and more health isn't too big of a deal, but it's kind of troublesome to see most of these bosses getting Hardy, or at least something with health. Now, the gimmick of this guy is that you need to explode him. Use the canisters on the ground to stun him and then shoot off the metal so that you can get to his middle weak spot. Unfortunately, my relics blow up all the canisters in the arena at once and don't really take off his metal at all. The good news is he can be stunned easily, but that's really all we have going for us. especially since he's immune to burning when rolling in the water. Looks like oil, but I guess it's not really what it is. Honestly, this was one of the less interesting fights because the decoy prevents him from rushing you after he slams down, and you're slowly taking his health down while getting rid of any other enemies that spawn in. For sure, you're not meant to fight this guy like this because, well, the fight's not designed around this, but it does work, so don't fix it. After a total of 7 minutes of relic popping, the brain eventually got splooted. Now, for those unaware, Nerud is the easiest planet to get off of, because there's only one boss in your way, and then you just need to find a cell and take it to the final boss to get out of there, skipping the second boss and making him optional. Since I already knew what the cell was instantly, and this was already kind of fun, I decided to just go for the optional boss. And to my surprise, I got my favorite boss in the game. The Custodian's Eye is, in my opinion, the peak of boss design in Remnant 2. It's a very cool looking robot that uses the arena to fight you as well as lasers and little robots. It's not the hardest fight overall because you can often hide behind pillars to nullify any damage, but it's a very fun fight that is a bit more than just dodging attacks. This time around he rolled with Hardy and Spiteful, which we've already seen, and again Hardy has shown up a lot. Nothing major except we cannot take any damage once he gets his health low, as we'll die instantly. The decoy turned out to be a double-edged sword here, as the red menace would disappear, and I get like a laser underneath me within seconds. And since the relic slows me down to use it, I can't easily avoid damage by moving to the side. What is cool is that because Medic gets more stagger resist while using a relic, I could stand still and tank when he does the red laser, as it doesn't have enough to fully kill me, and the relic gets me up to full health every single time. Pretty amusing, and actually allowed me to stay focused on damage more often. Usually when he drops the platform down, I stay up and dodge the lasers, but with this, I didn't really need to do that. I could simply avoid the lit up sections on the ground while still dealing damage. Even the blue laser phase, I was able to get attacks off. Only trouble is towards the end of the fight. You see, the eye starts rapid firing these blue orbs, and you will die if you don't take cover. But the cover moves around and isn't consistent on where it spawns. So it got pretty hairy a few times, and the medic shield definitely saved me, that's for sure. But after about 9 minutes and 4 total tries, I managed to blow up the Peeping Tom. With everything taken care of, it's finally time to bring Tal'Ratha, the cell, and take him down. I always choose his first form as the second gives me nightmares, and overall, it's a pretty standard fight. Dodge attacks, keep applying the damage slowly but surely, and yeah, he rolled with Drain and Skullcracker, which means getting hit, not really an option. Plus, if I don't take out the ads fast enough, he eats them to regain some more of his health. I am pretty familiar with his attacks at this point, so the melee and range stuff wasn't a big deal. The issues are his flop attack and orbs. If you stay too close, he might decide to roll over, and if you aren't already moving, this usually gets you, and it hits for some big damage. Then he can also summon orbs that we unfortunately cannot destroy. Usually with certain guns, you're going to shoot them, and then they're just out of the way. But the relic can't deal damage to them, and they track us, even doing a full 180 to hit us in the back. The decoy can alleviate some of this pressure by simply confusing the orbs, or you can run around in an S-like pattern. But it's pretty inconsistent on how to dodge these. Sometimes they just track a little too well, or you're out of position slightly, and boom, you're dead. Fortunately for me, this fight wasn't too hard. The decoy from Invader really messes with the boss, and can cause you to not be attacked at all for a large section of the fight. It's a pretty powerful passive to have, actually. After 3 total tries and a final fight lasting 8 minutes, we have defeated the 3rd major planet. Next up, we're going to head to Root Earth. A portal's opened up behind this eyeball and a girl, and we head out to stop the root once and for all. So for Yeisha, it was doable, although we did need to reload once because one of the bosses got empathy. The Labyrinth can't be done, unfortunately, but that's a gimmick boss anyway. Then both Blossom and Nerud were not bad at all. Clearing ads easily and bosses went down quickly, aside from the Magister. All things considered, a decent run of the game so far. But the toughest and most punishing bosses are yet to come. And if any of them roll empathy, I have to completely redo the entire campaign just to fight them over again, as they aren't in adventures, sadly. Will we get lucky? I sure hope so. Cancer's our first victim on this desolate world, and, well, his fight got a bit weird. You see, Cancer had Skullcracker and Vicious, making him a formidable opponent with more stagger and damage. Luckily, this boss does have a major weakness, his butt. You see, if you hug his backside, none of his attacks can actually hit you. Takes some work to stay back there, but definitely makes your life a lot easier. He also has these attacks that summon weeds from the ground, which are supposed to spread out, and you need to kind of wait around or destroy them before they go away. Except this time, not once but twice did he summon these, and they had like 15 of them stuck in one spot. And neither ever went away. I could tell as using a relic grants tons of damage numbers from destroying them all at once. It didn't come into play much, but I'd never seen that before. Cancer himself isn't too much of a problem as his weeds get destroyed when we deal any damage and all of his attacks are delayed, so just dodging after a second or two makes me nearly unkillable. His health, however, was the issue. You see, this last world has 3 bosses and each is pretty darn spongy on health. Also, since I can lose all of my relics if I'm not staying focused, these can get a bit more challenging. Using the power of distraction and some goofy butt-hugging mechanics, Cancer was defeated after 3 tries, with the final lasting about 7.5 minutes. Now for the boss everybody fears, the build breaker himself, Venom. Not only is this the single most aggressive boss in the game, but he is the toughest to dodge and deals possibly more damage than any of the rest of the bosses. On top of all that, I got him rolled with Drain and Regenerator. If you forgot, that's loads of health regen and lifesteal both at the same time. What proceeded can only be described as pure torture. With hardly any time to use my relic, he would heal so quickly that I was only doing chip damage, and even my shield skill wasn't enough to save me from getting dropped by some of those destructive attacks. Especially when I started kiting around objects and getting blown up through the frickin' wall. Plus, on one of the runs I messed up my skill and ran out of all of but 1 relic. Now, technically, using Medic and healing, I can get them back, but it requires taking damage, and that can take forever. With him being able to regenerate the entire time, I ended up just completely restarting. If there's anything I hate about this boss, it's his Spear Slam. It forces all these spikes out of the ground, which have a delayed attack. Best way to dodge it is to roll into him, but if you're too far away, it's not even an option at all. And if that doesn't kill you, the red pools can drop your health as soon as you touch him. And if that doesn't kill you, he follows this up with a long-range blast of explosives. So you need to dodge 3 different attacks in succession, and it's really easy to mess up. Gosh, this guy sucks, but at least he didn't have empathy. After around 4 total tries, each lasting around 10 minutes, we find ourselves up against the final boss of the game. After a long journey and a ton of relics, we finally reach Annihilation. What do we know about this boss? Well, he's gonna suck and be really tough. Nigh impossible, actually. With 2 separate phases, he has an insane amount of HP and can kill me with almost any of his bigger attacks. I am in for an extremely long fight, especially since my relics can't even hit him half the time way up in the air like that. Plus, we have an extra challenge to watch out for. One of his attacks spawns in several floating orbs. These do nothing for about 5 seconds and then come barreling towards you. This is almost always a one-shot, so it's best to destroy them, because while it is possible to dodge them, it is very easy to mess it up. But you can easily break them with 1 single relic use, but I have to have my skill active when they spawn in. Otherwise, I waste a relic that isn't really easy to get back. The first phase isn't bad, as I've done this many times over and each attack is predictable enough, but it definitely isn't optimal damage. Each try for this fight will take about 10 minutes just to get past the first phase, and he has even more health in the second. With my first try, I make it to the second phase mostly intact, except you might notice I only have 4 relics left. So apparently, the phase transition during the cutscene takes off my reboot skill and doesn't let me get any of the relics back. In other words, I need to transition without my skill active or lose a ton of my only weapon. As I didn't want to quit the first try yet, I decided to try and heal to use Medic's perk to get them back. Mid-fight, I switched from the shield heal to the rift as it works much better for that, and since I messed up the skill even worse, I had to regen all 10 relics. During this time of taking damage and healing for relics, I noticed something interesting. The healing rift was actually dealing damage, and not just any damage, explosion damage. So because of this, my amulet was actually proccing fire on him each time I brought it down. It's a very small amount, but still something. Well, after 10 minutes of this buffoonery, I only got a couple relics back and got dragged into the dimension hopping phase, getting him to about half health and failing with a mistimed crouch. That's a lot of time wasted, unfortunately. I forgot to mention, but this guy also got Hardy for more health and Vicious, which is 15% more damage. One of the worst sets to get here, of course. Now, I tried again with this same exact strategy and basically had the same results. Lost a lot of relics in the transition and then died when he got only like 1/4 of his health left. So far, we are really close in both tries, but with only 2 tries, both taking up a total of an hour. Pretty grueling work. However, something interesting happened on the 3rd try. I took off 1 ring and replaced it with the Black Cat Band, losing about 10% cooldown but gaining a free death hit every 2 minutes. Since this is such a long fight, I figured I'd probably get a lot out of it. And yeah, it saved me once or twice into the second half. But here's where things get really weird. I have the boss in the second phase at a little over half health. He starts to summon a bunch of the orbs, but I managed to take a relic at the exact second he did this, and instantly he was stunned. This is not supposed to happen. There were still a couple orbs left, and he only stuns when all the orbs are gone. Not realizing this, I went to destroy the last 2 orbs and run back to fight him. And then he just sort of stood there. With only 1 relic left, as yes, I again messed this up, it only happened in the last boss fight, I started slowly regenerating the relics using the medic's heal, all while slowly dealing damage with the minimal relics I had. But still, nothing at all. And for 10 straight minutes, he let me relic him without doing anything whatsoever. No attacks, no dimension hopping, nothing. I fought this guy over 30 some times in Apocalypse and never seen this before. There were a couple times I thought the people might want me to try and back out and do it legit. And then I remembered, oh yeah, it takes like a half an hour for every try. And then those thoughts seemed to vanish for some reason. Plus, since I put the Black Cat Band on, I wasn't really gonna die anyway. I mean, I like to think so. So with a very anticlimactic final battle, I stopped the route and officially beat Remnant 2 with only a relic. Unfortunately, this challenge isn't really possible since the Labyrinth cube exists and any empathy boss you happen to roll just stops you right in your path. But you can get really close with a good amount of RNG. While I certainly wouldn't recommend this build in boss fights, it is doable and actually stupid overpowered for dungeons. You can actually deal with enemies around corners before they even see you. It's kinda nuts. I will pull up the build here so everyone can see how I did this. Do mess with max cooldown. It has some interesting results when paired with different classes. And there you have my first ever challenge run. Remnant 2 Relic only. Had a lot of fun here, and it wasn't nearly as hard as I thought it would be. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, a like down below would be amazing. This is by far one of my favorite games because the build variety is wild. Much crazier than anything you could do in the first game, even though that one was pretty good too. Hopefully you're enjoying Remnant 2 and do get creative, as even something as insane as a Relic only run can work if you mess around enough. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll catch you next time.